After being kicked out by my parents, I moved in with my grandparents on their farm. Unable to afford rent, I stayed in a small room downstairs, surrounded by my grandmother's religious relics, including a massive painting of Jesus watching over me as I slept. Things took a strange turn during my second week there. One evening, returning from my job at a corner store, I heard footsteps rustling through the crop. Assuming someone was stealing produce, I crept closer, careful not to make noise. What I saw wasn't human. Someone was crawling on all fours, moving unnaturally. Too unsettled to confront them, I woke my grandfather. He stormed outside, rifle in hand, shouting threats into the darkness. The next night, I woke to laughter outside my window. A figure stood there, staring in before vanishing. My grandfather, furious, grabbed his gun again. This time, as he opened the front door, something grabbed his leg, tripping him. I tackled the intruder while my grandfather aimed his rifle. I called the sheriff, but then my grandfather screamed. Another man had punched him in the face before fleeing. Later, arriving home late one night, I spotted a note from my mom about taking out the trash. As I approached the cans, I heard voices in the backyard. Peering over the fence, I saw two strangers by the patio. Panicked, I rushed inside to warn my mom. We barely escaped out her bedroom window as the intruders entered the house. 2 weeks later, the phone rang incessantly at 3 a.m. After ignoring it, my mom received a chilling text. "Why didn't you pick up?" Another unsettling incident involved a 14-year-old girl who woke to noises inside her walls. When her parents rushed in, they found a man hiding in a storage space with stolen underwear in his pocket. One night, while walking along a deserted beach, my wife and I noticed fresh footprints that hadn't been there before. Following them led us to a tunnel where two hunched, naked figures crouched in the darkness. We fled without looking back. Working as a night janitor at a high school, I was alone when a classroom light flicked on across the building. A man stood at the window, staring, before slowly waving. Security footage later showed him emerging from the basement, then vanishing without a trace. Cleaning houses as a teenager, I once discovered hidden photos of myself in every room of a client's home. His locked basement reeked of decay, lined with disturbing posters. A ceiling camera tracked my movements before I bolted. Another close call happened after a late shift, when a couple in a pickup truck demanded money, then chased and shot at my car. Exploring an abandoned asylum with a friend, we heard footsteps following us through the halls, only to escape just as something burst through a door behind us. After moving into a new house, my wife and I heard noises beneath the floor, despite there being no basement. One night, we discovered a hidden door in her closet, leading to a secret room. A stranger tried breaking in as I climbed back up, his wild eyes locking onto mine before he fled. Our last apartment had a neighbor who screamed and banged all night. When I confronted her, the landlord insisted she lived alone. Yet one night, she stood at the foot of our bed, whispering threats before vanishing. We moved out the next day. The world is full of unsettling encounters, some explainable, others far from it. That summer night, my friend and I decided to explore the old train tunnels outside town. We'd heard rumors about strange happenings there, whispers in the dark, figures seen darting between the support beams. Armed with flashlights, we entered the damp, echoing passageway. At first, it was just the usual thrill of trespassing, the crunch of gravel underfoot, the way our voices bounced off the curved walls. But then, we heard it. A low, rhythmic scraping, like something being dragged along the tracks ahead. Our lights revealed nothing but empty tunnel. We pressed on until my friend suddenly grabbed my arm. "Look," he whispered, pointing at the wall. Etched into the stone were dozens of symbols, crude, overlapping, as if carved by different hands over years. Some looked disturbingly fresh. Then the temperature dropped. Our breath fogged in the air despite the summer heat outside. A gust of wind rushed through the tunnel. Impossible, since both ends were open. Our flashlights flickered. That's when we saw the shadow. It didn't move like a person. It slid along the wall, stretching and contorting in ways that made my stomach lurch. We ran, our footsteps echoing like gunshots. Behind us, the scraping sound sped up, keeping pace. We burst into the moonlight, not stopping until we reached the car. Later, checking our photos, we found one blurred shot where the tunnel mouth seemed to ripple, like something invisible had been chasing us out. Another time, while hiking through state forest, I took a wrong turn and stumbled upon a clearing that shouldn't have existed. In the center stood a ring of stones, each about waist-high, covered in moss. The air smelled metallic, like old blood. My skin prickled. Between two stones hung strands of what looked like hair, long, matted, knotted around the rocks. Beneath them lay animal bones arranged in pattern. My phone had no signal. The compass spun wildly. I backed away slowly, but the forest had changed. The path I'd taken was gone. Trees pressed closer, their branches twisted at unnatural angles. It took hours of walking in what I prayed was the right direction before I found a familiar trail marker. When I reported the site to park rangers, they found no trace of the clearing. But months later, another hiker disappeared in that area. Stretch of woods. Search teams never found him. Just his backpack, placed neatly at the base of a tree, the contents carefully arranged in a circle. Some places don't want to be found. Some things don't want to be seen. But sometimes, whether by accident or design, we cross paths with them anyway. And those encounters leave marks that never quite fade. There are places that hum with wrongness, where the air sits too still and the shadows don't move right. I learned that the hard way when I took a job as a night watchman at the old textile mill on the edge of town. The first week was quiet, just the groan of old pipes and the occasional scuttle of rat. But then I started noticing things. Tools left in places I didn't remember seeing them. Doors slightly ajar when I knew I'd locked them. One night, the security monitors flickered, and for just a second, every screen showed the same grainy image. A figure standing in the third-floor hallway, its head tilted at an impossible angle. I told myself it was a glitch, until I heard the footsteps. They'd started around 2 a.m. Slow, deliberate steps, pacing the floor above me. I'd radio for backup, but by the time security arrived, the sounds would stop. The cameras showed nothing. Then, one night, I found the elevator running by itself, going up and down between the third floor and basement, like it was ferrying invisible passengers. The final straw came when I checked the employee logbook. Flipping through the pages, I found entries dated back to the 1940s, all in the same cramped handwriting, all describing the same thing. Third floor again tonight. It's getting closer to the stairs. The last entry was from the night before my shift started. I quit the next morning. 2 weeks later, the mill burned down. The fire marshal said it started in the basement, but the way the flames spread, straight up, floor by floor, like something was hurting the fire, made the old-timers at the diner shake their heads. Then there was the time I house-sat for a professor at the university. His Victorian home was all creaking wood and stained glass, with a study lined in first edition book. He warned me not to touch the locked cabinet in the corner. Of course, I did. Inside were journals, filled with sketches of creatures that shouldn't exist. Things with too many joints, faces that folded in on themselves. The last journal detailed his experiments with something he called the Hollow Men. The final entry read, "They'd learned to knock." That night, 3 sharp raps came from the attic. Then the walls started breathing. Not expanding, just a slow, rhythmic pulse beneath the wallpaper. I spent dawn on the porch with my car keys in my fist. When the professor returned, he took one look at my face and said, "You opened it." Not a question. The worst part? He smiled. I still wake up sometimes hearing that attic knocking pattern. 3 slow, then 2 fast. Last month I found it scratched into my apartment door's peephole from the outside. They say curiosity killed the cat, but sometimes the cat gets away. Just missing enough pieces to know better next time. Problem is, in this world, next time always finds you first. The human mind has a way of stitching together explanations, even when none fit. I learned this during my brief stint as a night auditor at the Redwood Inn, a faded motor lodge off Route 9. The place had that particular stillness of buildings that remember too much. The kind where your reflection in the lobby windows sometimes blinks a second too late. Started with room 214. Guests would check in fine, then come screaming to the front desk at 317. AIEM exactly, insisting someone was in their shower. We'd find the bathroom dry, the curtain still swaying slightly. The manager called it plumbing noises. But I saw the security footage once. A pale hand curling around the shower curtain from the inside, right as the guest woke up screaming. The timestamp glitched at 3:16 and 59 seconds. Then came the whispers. They'd start around midnight. Murmurs just beyond the lobby's buzzing fluorescence. Not words, exactly. More like someone practicing speech by imitating the rise and fall of human conversation. I'd turn, and the shadows between vending machines would thicken for half a heartbeat. The final incident happened during a thunderstorm. A businessman checked into 2014 against my advice. At 3:17, the fire alarm went off. When we evacuated, his door stood open. The bed was neatly made, his suitcase unpacked, toiletries arranged on the sink. But the shower was running scalding hot. The mirror fogged with one word, finger-written near the top. Down. We found him in the basement boiler room, though the door had been locked from the outside. He was curled in the dry concrete overflow drain, his suit jacket folded neatly beside him. His mouth moved like he was still trying to scream, but all that came out was that same whispering nonsense. The doctors called it shock. I quit that night. Last I heard, they demolished the Redwood Inn. The night it happened, a neighbor swore she saw figures standing in every window of the abandoned building, all facing inward toward room 2014. Some doors should stay closed, some showers should stay dry, and some night shifts, well, let's just say there's a reason they pay extra. The worst horrors aren't the ones that jump out at you. They're the ones that settle in slowly, like cold, seeping into your bones. I learned this when I took a job as a live-in caretaker for the old Whitmore estate. The pay was too good to refuse, and the elderly Mrs. Whitmore seemed harmless enough. Just a frail woman who spoke to her late husband's portrait every evening. The first oddity came on my 3rd night. I awoke to the sound of the grand piano playing downstairs, a slow, mournful tune I didn't recognize. When I went to investigate, the music stopped abruptly. The piano bench was still warm. Then the photographs started changing. Mrs. Whitmore had dozens of family portraits lining the halls. At first I thought I was imagining it. A slight shift in posture here, a new figure appearing there. But one morning I passed a wedding photo I'd seen 100 times before, only to realize the groom's face had become blurred, as if someone had rubbed it out with their thumb while the ink was still wet. The old woman just chuckled when I asked about it. "The house remembers things differently," she said. Things escalated when I found the basement door unlocked. It was always kept bolted, with Mrs. Whitmore insisting there was nothing down there but old memories. That night, drawn by a faint humming sound, I descended the narrow stairs. The basement was a time capsule. Mid-century furniture covered in sheets, a record player spinning silently despite the needle being raised. And everywhere, photographs. Hundreds of them, pinned to clotheslines crisscrossing the room. All of the same family, all taken in this house, all with the subject's eyes scratched out. I backed toward the stairs just as the record player clicked on by itself. A woman's voice, eerily similar to Mrs. Whitmore's but decades younger, began singing a lullaby. The clothesline swayed, though there was no draft. When I turned to run, I found Mrs. Whitmore standing at the top of the stairs, her gnarled fingers resting on the light switch. "I told you not to go down there," she whispered. Then she plunged me into darkness. I quit the next morning. As I drove away, I glanced back at the house. Every window on the second floor was filled with shadowy figures watching me leave. Mrs. Whitmore stood alone on the porch, waving slowly. They say every house has its secrets. The Whitmore estate doesn't keep secrets. It collects them. And from what I saw in that basement, it's nearly full. The most dangerous places are the ones that feel familiar. I discovered this when I moved into my grandmother's old farmhouse after she passed. The property had been in our family for generations, its weathered clapboard walls steeped in the scent of old books and wood smoke. At first, it felt like coming home, until the house began remembering things that never happened. It started with a rocking chair. Grandma's favorite chair still sat by the fireplace, its oak frame worn smooth by decades of use. One morning I found it rocking gently, though no window was open. When I touched it, the wood was ice cold. That night, I awoke to the sound of creaking runners on hardwood, back and forth, until dawn. Then the photographs in the hallway began whispering. At first I thought it was the wind, but standing by the faded family portraits, I could make out voices murmuring just below hearing. Conversations between people who weren't in the pictures. One evening, my own graduation photo joined the section, though I'd never given it to Grandma. In the image, someone stands just behind me, their face blurred beyond recognition. The worst was the cellar door. It had always been locked tight, the key lost years ago. But one rainy night, I heard something scratching at it from below. Not the frantic scrabbling of an animal, slow, deliberate strokes, like fingernails dragging across wood grain. When I pressed my ear to the door, the scratching stopped. Something breathed heavily on the other side. I called a locksmith the next day. The moment the door swung open, the smell hit us. Damp earth and something sweetly rotten. The stairs descended into perfect darkness. Our flashlight revealed shelves lined with mason jars, each filled with dark liquid and things. Fingers, teeth, lockets of hair tied with ribbon. The locksmith bolted up the stairs. I followed, slamming the cellar door behind us. That's when we noticed the fresh scratches on the outside of the door. Long, vertical grooves that hadn't been there minutes before. I sold the farmhouse a week later. The new owners called me last month to ask about the interesting collection in the cellar. When I told them I'd never gone down there, the line went silent for a long moment. Then, who, they asked, has been adding to it? Some houses don't just hold memories, they cultivate them. And whatever grows in that cellar has been tended carefully for generations. I just thank God I wasn't there when it came time to halves. There are places where the past doesn't just linger, it takes root. I learned this the hard way when I inherited my great-aunt's cottage on Blackwater Lake. The deed came with a single condition: never open the blue door. Of course, that's exactly what I did. The cottage seemed normal enough at first, quaint if slightly musty, but I kept finding things out of place. A teacup left steaming on the kitchen table when no one was home. The scent of lavender perfume in rooms my great-aunt had never visited. And every morning, fresh footprints in the dust leading to, but never from, the blue door at the end of the hall. The door itself was unnerving, painted an unnatural shade of cobalt. Its surface stayed ice-cold, even in direct sunlight. The brass knob would sometimes rattle at night, as if something were testing it from the other side. One rainy afternoon, I noticed the door stood slightly ajar. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I pushed it open. The room beyond was impossibly large, a cavernous space that couldn't possibly fit within the cottage's dimensions. The walls were covered in hundreds of clocks, all ticking in perfect unison, despite most having no hands. In the center stood a rocking chair, its cushion still indented as if someone had just risen from it. That's when I smelled the lavender again. A whisper brushed my ear. "You shouldn't be here." I turned to find the door had vanished, replaced by endless rows of clocks. The temperature plummeted. From the shadow between the timepieces, pale fingers began emerging, grasping at the air. I ran blindly through the maze of ticking clocks, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Just as cold hands closed around my wrist, I stumbled through what felt like a curtain of cobwebs, and found myself sprawled in the cottage hallway. The blue door shut tight behind me. The realtor told me the cottage burned down last winter. Lightning strike, they said. But the fire chief's report noted something peculiar. While the main structure was reduced to ashes, the blue door was found completely intact, leaning against a charred support beam. Its surface wasn't even scorched. Sometimes at night, I still hear faint ticking coming from my closet. And last week, I found a single blue paint chip on my pillow, the exact shade of that damned door. Certain doors should never be opened, and some, once opened, never truly close. There are places where the veil between worlds wears thin, where the past bleeds into the present like ink on wet paper. I discovered this truth when I took a job transcribing journals for the reclusive historian, Dr. Voss, in his decaying mansion on the edge of the salt marshes. The work seemed simple enough. Decipher his collection of 19th century diaries, written in some obscure cipher. But the first night, as I bent over the yellowed pages in the lamplight, I realized the handwriting was changing before my eyes. The elegant script would suddenly degenerate into frantic schisms, the ink sometimes appearing fresh and wet despite the pages being centuries old. Then I found the first reference to the Whispering Gallery. According to the journals, the mansion's original owner, a sea captain named Harlow, had built a secret chamber where sound carried completely between walls. But the entries grew increasingly disturbed, describing how the gallery began collecting voices until one could hear entire conversations from decades past bleeding through the plaster. The most chilling passage read, "The gallery has learned to answer back." I would have dismissed it as madness if not for what happened next. Working late one night, I heard faint murmurs coming from inside the walls. Not the settling of an old house, but distinct whispers that paused when I held my breath. At exactly 2:17 I checked my watch. The voices coalesced into a single sentence spoken in unison. "You're reading our words." The next morning, I confronted Dr. Voss. He merely smiled and led me to a nondescript section of hallway. Pressing his palm against the wallpaper, he whispered, "Listen." The wall was breathing, not metaphorically. I could see the floral patterns swelling and contracting rhythmically. and beneath it that same chorus of whispers, now perfectly clear. Let us out. I quit that afternoon. As I drove away, I glanced back to see Dr. Voss standing in an upstairs window, his face pressed against the glass. Except, and I swear this on my life, his reflection in the glass wasn't moving in sync with him. Last week, I received a package containing one of the journals I'd transcribed. The final page, which had been blank before, now bore a single line in my own handwriting. The walls remember what the living forget. And sometimes, if I press my ear to my apartment wall at night, I can hear the faintest scratching, like someone on the other side transcribing my every word. There are places where the boundary between the living and the dead isn't just thin, it's porous. I learned this when I took a job as night watchman at the abandoned Rosewood Theater, a crumbling Art Deco relic that had been closed since the 1957 fire that claimed 14 lives during a sold-out performance of Macbeth. The first sign something was wrong came during my initial rounds. The projector in the booth would turn itself on, casting flickering light across the empty auditorium, except the film reels had been removed. Decades ago, the beam showed nothing but swirling dust, until shadows began moving across it, forming distinct human shapes walking down the aisles toward the screen. Then came the applause. At precisely 3:17 a.m. each night, the exact time the fire had started, the theater would fill with the sound of clapping from hundreds of unseen hands. The first time it happened, I rushed into the auditorium to find every seat empty. Yet the velvet cushions were visibly depressed, as if an invisible audience had just risen to leave. The worst was the basement dressing rooms. Following reports of locked, peer, and crying coming from below, I investigated and found room 7, the star dressing room, locked from the inside. Through the keyhole, I saw the vanity lights were on, their reflections shimmering in the cracked mirror. Then a woman's face appeared in the glass, her features melting like wax as she screamed silently. When I called the police, they found the door bolted from the outside, rusted shut for years. But inside, the vanity lights were warm to the touch, and the mirror bore fresh fingerprints in what looked like grease paint. I lasted 2 weeks before quitting. On my final night, as I walked down the empty aisle one last time, something grabbed my wrist. I looked down to see a charred handprint seared into my skin. The fingers curled exactly where the fire victims had been found, clutching the exit doors. The theater was demolished last month. The construction foreman called me in a panic after workers reported hearing standing ovations coming from the rubble at night. They found 14 perfectly preserved theater seats in the basement, arranged in a circle, each bearing the faint impression of a body, all facing center stage. Some performances never end, some audiences never leave, and some tragedies don't just haunt places, they become them. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check my skin. The handprint has started spreading. The human mind craves closure, but some stories refuse to end neatly. The handprint has faded now, though sometimes, in certain lights, I still see its outline. A ghostly reminder that the past never truly releases its grip. Perhaps that's the final lesson these encounters teach. We walk through life believing we're the audience to our own stories, when in truth, we're just players on a stage where the curtains never fully close. The lights may dim, the crowds may disperse, but the performance continues in ways we can't always see. So, if you ever find yourself alone in an empty theater, or hear applause when no one's there, remember, you may not be as alone as you think. And when the unseen hands begin clapping, ask yourself, are they applauding your arrival or your final bow?